King Charles could strip his youngest brother of a long-awaited title in an attempt to slim down the monarchy. In 1999, Prince Edward was promised by the Queen.
Royal watchers were blindsided when Edward's lawyers reportedly confirmed that his inheritance rested on legal foundations even a reigning king could not simply rewrite. For years, many assumed Charles held the final authority, but overlooked documents, royal precedent, and long-standing promises now raise difficult questions. Was the public misunderstanding the story all along, or has history quietly exposed a very different truth? So, do you think Edward simply received what was always his, or has this controversy been misunderstood? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
And there's simply no evidence to suggest their claims are accurate. In the last year alone, or the last month alone, we can look that recently, the King has requested that Prince Edward be made a Councillor of State.
Lawyers reveal hidden royal legacy. Royal watchers were caught off guard when discussions surrounding Prince Edward's legal position began drawing renewed attention to decisions made years before King Charles III ascended the throne. Rather than focusing solely on Edward's elevation as Duke of Edinburgh in 2023, legal experts pointed toward a much broader legacy shaped over decades. Their interpretation suggested that the story was never simply about receiving a title. Instead, it involved a carefully established succession plan rooted in the wishes of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, raising fresh questions about how much of that legacy had already been settled long before Charles became king. For many observers, that realization challenged assumptions that a new monarch could freely reshape every aspect of royal family arrangements. The surprise came because the Duke of Edinburgh title had carried unusual significance for generations. Prince Philip held it throughout most of his public life, making it one of the most recognizable roles within the royal family. Long before his death, he had publicly expressed the hope that Edward would eventually inherit the title. Queen Elizabeth II was understood to support that intention, creating expectations that stretched back decades rather than beginning with Charles's reign. When Charles officially granted Edward the title in 2023, many viewed it as a simple ceremonial decision. Yet others argued it represented the fulfillment of a promise carefully preserved through years of planning. That distinction soon became the center of growing debate. If Edward's position reflected a long-established family decision rather than a personal gift from the new king, what exactly had Charles inherited the authority to change? Constitutional experts frequently note that many aspects of the monarchy operate through long-standing convention, legal arrangements, and established precedent instead of personal preference. Those differences often remain invisible to the public, but they can become critically important whenever questions about succession, titles, or royal responsibilities emerge. Edward's circumstances appeared to illustrate precisely that complexity. Attention also turned toward the broader meaning of inheritance itself. To some, it referred only to the title of Duke of Edinburgh. Others believed it included the responsibility of preserving Prince Philip's charitable vision, public service, and enduring legacy. The distinction mattered because the title represented far more than status. It carried decades of history, expectations, and public commitment that could not easily be separated from the man who had defined it for so long. As interest continued to build, one question refused to disappear. Had the public misunderstood Edward's inheritance all along, assuming it began in 2023 when its foundations had actually been laid many years earlier? That uncertainty transformed what seemed like a straightforward royal transition into a far deeper story about promises, tradition, and constitutional continuity. It also hinted that the most significant chapter of Edward's journey might not begin with Charles at all, but with decisions quietly made long before a new reign ever started. Behind the crown lies a boundary few understand. But what happens when a king discovers he cannot rewrite history? Where does inherited power end and constitutional restraint begin? And if even Charles is limited, who truly controls the monarchy's future decisions? Let's find out. Crown power meets constitutional limits. As debate over Prince Edward's inheritance continued to grow, attention shifted away from family relationships and toward a far more complex question. How much authority does a British monarch actually possess? The discussion gained momentum because many people assumed that once Charles became king, he automatically gained complete control over every royal title, residence, and arrangement connected to the crown. Yet constitutional experts have long explained that the reality is far more complicated. The crown operates within a framework shaped by law, long-established conventions, and previous legal decisions. That distinction became increasingly important as observers examined Edward's position and the legal reasoning surrounding his role as Duke of Edinburgh. At first glance, the issue appeared straightforward. Charles had formally created Edward as Duke of Edinburgh in 2023, fulfilling the long-standing wishes of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Because the title was granted during Charles's reign, some believed it could also be altered whenever the king considered it necessary. However, that assumption overlooked the difference between the ceremonial act of granting a title and the broader legal arrangements that often surround royal responsibilities. Lawyers familiar with constitutional matters pointed out that these issues cannot simply be reduced to personal preference or family authority. They are often governed by established principles that have developed over centuries. Another source of confusion involved the distinction between royal titles and royal property. Many people naturally grouped everything together, believing titles, official residences, crown estate assets, and personal possessions all belonged entirely to the monarch. In reality, each category follows different legal rules. Crown estate property is managed separately from the monarch's private wealth, while leased royal residences are governed by contractual agreements rather than personal ownership. Titles themselves carry their own constitutional traditions and cannot automatically change every related arrangement. Understanding those differences helped explain why Edward's legal position attracted such careful attention. Historical precedent also played a significant role. The British monarchy has survived for centuries, partly because successive sovereigns generally respected decisions that had already been lawfully established. Every new reign introduces changes, yet continuity remains one of the institution's defining principles. That tradition protects public confidence by ensuring that major constitutional arrangements do not shift with every change of monarch. Edward's situation became another example of how deeply that principle influences modern royal life. Supporters of this interpretation argued that the debate was never about limiting Charles personally. Instead, they believed it highlighted the constitutional boundaries that apply to every sovereign. Others questioned whether the public had misunderstood the king's powers for years, assuming they were broader than they truly are. That uncertainty fueled continuing discussion, with historians, commentators, and legal observers offering differing perspectives while remaining rooted in the same constitutional framework. As these arguments gained wider attention, one conclusion became increasingly difficult to ignore. The real story was not about whether Charles wished to change royal arrangements, but about whether centuries of constitutional tradition allowed any monarch to do so. That unanswered question transformed Edward's inheritance into something much larger than a family matter, pointing toward deeper questions about authority, continuity, and the enduring limits of royal power itself. Was Prince Philip quietly shaping a future no one understood at the time? What did he see in Edward that others missed? And why did the Duke of Edinburgh title matter more than anyone realized? And could those early decisions still be influencing what unfolds now? Keep watching. Philip's quiet legacy finally emerges. Long before Prince Edward became Duke of Edinburgh, the foundations of that moment were already being carefully laid behind palace walls. As renewed attention focused on Edward's inheritance, many royal observers began looking beyond recent events and back to the quiet determination of Prince Philip. What initially appeared to be a routine change of title gradually revealed itself as the final step in a plan that had taken decades to unfold. The more historians revisited Philip's public remarks and the decisions surrounding the title, the clearer it became that Edward's future had been considered long before King Charles III ascended the throne. Prince Philip carried the Duke of Edinburgh title for more than 70 years, making it one of the most recognizable roles within the royal family. Throughout those decades, he devoted himself to public service, military associations, and the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, a youth program that reached millions around the world. The title became closely linked with his personal identity and life's work. Because of that connection, questions naturally arose about who would one day continue the legacy he had spent a lifetime building. Rather than leaving that question unanswered, Philip made his preference publicly known. On several occasions, it was reported that he hoped Edward would eventually inherit the title and continue the mission that had become synonymous with his name. Queen Elizabeth II was widely understood to share that vision. Together, they appeared determined to preserve not only a title, but also the values and responsibilities attached to it. Their intention was not simply about honoring family tradition. It reflected a belief that continuity mattered, especially for an institution built upon stability across generations. Edward's steady approach to royal duties, combined with years of quiet public service alongside his wife Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, reinforced the impression that he was being prepared for a role carrying far greater meaning than ceremonial prestige alone. When Philip died in 2021 and Queen Elizabeth II followed the next year, their shared wishes took on even greater significance. Public attention shifted toward the future of the title, yet uncertainty remained because it could only be granted by the reigning monarch. That moment finally arrived in 2023, when King Charles III formally created Edward as Duke of Edinburgh on his 59th birthday. For some, it appeared to be a generous decision by the new king. For others, it represented the fulfillment of a promise made many years earlier, one that Charles had chosen to honor, rather than create himself. That distinction continued to shape public discussion. If Edward's elevation reflected the completion of a long-established family plan, then the significance of his inheritance stretched well beyond the official announcement. It became part of a much longer story involving duty, preparation, and the preservation of a legacy carefully protected across 2 reigns. As more pieces of that history came into focus, the central mystery only deepened. The title itself was visible for everyone to see, but the years of planning behind it suggested that Edward's greatest inheritance had never been measured by rank alone, leaving even bigger questions still waiting to be answered. Why did earlier agreements quietly bind the monarchy? How far did ownership truly extend? And what legal barriers suddenly surfaced when Charles tried to intervene? And as lawyers revisited the forgotten framework, one question emerged. Was this structure ever designed to be reversed at all? Stay glued. Documents that changed everything quietly. As the debate surrounding Prince Edward's inheritance continued, attention gradually shifted from royal titles to something far less visible, but equally important: the legal arrangements that had been established years before. What seemed like ordinary administrative decisions suddenly attracted fresh scrutiny, as observers tried to understand why Edward's position appeared more secure than many had first assumed. The discussion was no longer centered solely on family expectations. Instead, it focused on agreements, leases, and long-standing royal practices that had quietly shaped the future long before Charles became king. Those details rarely attracted headlines, yet they formed the framework behind one of the monarchy's least understood stories. Among the most discussed pieces of that framework was Bagshot Park, the official residence of the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. Although many people viewed the estate simply as another royal home, its legal status was considerably more complex. Bagshot Park is owned by the Crown Estate rather than by individual members of the royal family. That distinction matters because occupying a royal residence does not automatically mean owning it. Instead, arrangements are governed through formal leases and carefully defined legal agreements that continue regardless of changes within the monarchy. Understanding that difference became essential as public interest in Edward's position intensified. Edward's connection to Bagshot Park stretched back decades. In 1998, he accepted a long-term lease on the property after extensive discussions about its future. At the time, the historic residence required significant restoration before it could function as a family home. Public records show that Edward personally contributed substantial private funds toward renovation work, while additional improvements were carried out under established agreements. Those investments demonstrated a long-term commitment that extended far beyond ceremonial occupation. Rather than treating the estate as temporary accommodation, he helped restore and maintain an important historic property that had fallen into serious disrepair. Legal observers often pointed to these publicly documented arrangements as evidence that royal residences cannot simply be viewed through the lens of personal authority. A lease creates rights and responsibilities that exist independently of changing family circumstances. While the reigning monarch occupies a unique constitutional position, contractual agreements involving Crown estate properties follow legal principles that remain separate from personal ownership. That distinction became increasingly significant as commentators examined what powers a sovereign actually holds over such arrangements. Historical precedent reinforced the same conclusion. Across generations, carefully negotiated agreements concerning royal residences have generally remained respected because they contribute to institutional continuity. Altering those arrangements without established legal processes would raise questions extending far beyond a single family member. For constitutional historians, that stability represents one of the monarchy's greatest strengths, preserving confidence in an institution built upon consistency rather than sudden change. Even so, uncertainty continued to surround public understanding of these issues. Some believed royal authority naturally extended over every residence connected to the crown, while others argued that legal agreements provided stronger protections than many realized. That difference in interpretation kept the discussion alive. With every new examination of leases, public records, and constitutional practice, one reality became increasingly difficult to ignore. Edward's position rested not only upon history and family wishes, but also upon carefully constructed legal foundations, whose significance was only beginning to receive wider attention. Edward steps into a legacy far heavier than most realize, where every tradition carries unseen weight and expectation. What truly lies behind the Duke of Edinburgh title? What obligations have been quietly passed down? And how far does this responsibility reach beyond the palace walls? Stay tuned. Legacy measured. Beyond royal honors. As public discussion surrounding Prince Edward's inheritance continued to evolve, another realization slowly emerged. The Duke of Edinburgh title was never intended to be viewed as a prize awarded at the end of a royal journey. Instead, it represented decades of service, responsibility, and commitment built by Prince Philip over the course of an extraordinary lifetime. That understanding changed how many people viewed Edward's position. Rather than inheriting status alone, he appeared to be accepting an obligation that had been carefully shaped through generations. The distinction added new emotional weight to a story that had already raised difficult questions about legacy, authority, and continuity within the monarchy. The history of the title stretches back centuries, yet its modern identity became inseparable from Prince Philip himself. After receiving the title before Queen Elizabeth II became monarch, Philip transformed it into something far greater than a traditional noble rank. Through thousands of public engagements, military patronages, and charitable initiatives, he gave the role a unique purpose that reached well beyond royal ceremony. His influence became especially visible through the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, a youth development program encouraging leadership, resilience, and community service. Millions of young people across the world have participated in the program, making it one of his most enduring achievements. Because of that remarkable legacy, the future of the title carried unusual importance. Philip had publicly expressed his wish that Edward should eventually succeed him, believing his youngest son possessed the steady character needed to continue the work. Queen Elizabeth II was understood to support that intention, reinforcing the impression that the succession represented careful planning rather than a last-minute decision. When Charles formally granted Edward the title in 2023, many recognized the ceremony as the completion of a promise that had begun years before, not the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Edward's own record also contributed to that perception. Unlike some members of the royal family who often attracted intense media attention, he built a reputation through consistency rather than headlines. Together with Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, he gradually assumed greater responsibilities, representing the crown at official engagements while supporting charitable organizations across the United Kingdom and abroad. His growing public role reflected quiet preparation rather than sudden promotion, making the transition appear both natural and carefully considered. Some commentators argued that the greatest inheritance Edward received could never be measured by rank or ceremony. They believed he inherited a mission that demanded patience, dedication, and a willingness to preserve values established long before his appointment. Others viewed the title primarily as a constitutional honor, suggesting that expectations surrounding its symbolic importance had grown larger over time. Even so, both perspectives acknowledge the remarkable influence Prince Philip left behind. As these interpretations continued to shape public debate, one conclusion became increasingly persuasive. Edward's inheritance represented far more than a change in formal titles. It carried the responsibility of protecting a legacy built through decades of public service, ensuring that one of Prince Philip's defining achievements would continue into a new generation. That realization transformed the entire story, suggesting the true value of the inheritance lay not in privilege, but in purpose itself. How far do constitutional conventions actually protect Edward's position? What do legal interpretations quietly reveal about royal precedent? And if inheritance is not what everyone assumes, then what truly anchors his status? Stay with us. Truth, hidden inside constitutional tradition. As questions surrounding Prince Edward's inheritance continued to spread, attention increasingly turned toward the legal experts studying the constitutional framework behind the monarchy. Their explanations did not rely on palace rumors or dramatic confrontations. Instead, they focused on centuries of law, convention, and royal precedent that shape how the institution functions. For many observers, this marked a turning point. The discussion was no longer driven by speculation about family disagreements, but by a closer examination of what the British monarchy actually allows a sovereign to change. That distinction surprised many people who had long assumed the king possessed unlimited authority over every royal matter. Constitutional specialists often explain that the British monarch occupies a unique position unlike that of a private property owner. Although the sovereign performs important constitutional duties, many royal arrangements are governed by established legal principles rather than personal discretion. Titles, official residences, crown estate assets, private estates, and personal possessions each fall under different rules. Those distinctions can appear technical, yet they become essential whenever questions arise about succession, inheritance, or long-standing royal agreements. Edward's situation brought those differences into unusually sharp focus. Lawyers examining the circumstances surrounding the Duke of Edinburgh title emphasized that constitutional continuity remains one of the monarchy's strongest foundations. Successive monarchs inherit an institution built upon precedent, not simply personal authority. Every sovereign introduces changes, but those changes generally operate within existing legal structures rather than replacing them altogether. That principle has helped preserve stability through generations, ensuring that carefully established arrangements are respected unless lawful processes require otherwise. For historians, this continuity represents one reason the monarchy has endured through changing political and social landscapes. The debate also highlighted another commonly misunderstood distinction. Inheritance does not always mean ownership. Some royal responsibilities pass through formal appointments, while certain properties are managed through leases or institutional arrangements. Other assets remain private property belonging to individual members of the royal family. Treating every category as though it falls under identical rules creates confusion and encourages misconceptions about the powers available to the reigning monarch. Legal commentators suggested that understanding these separate categories offered a clearer explanation of Edward's position than any dramatic theory could provide. Public attention naturally intensified as these legal interpretations became more widely discussed. Some commentators argued that Edward's position appeared unusually secure because it rested upon documented constitutional practice rather than temporary personal favor. Others cautioned that royal matters often involve unique circumstances, making broad conclusions difficult. Even so, there was widespread agreement that public understanding of royal authority had often been simplified, overlooking the complex legal framework supporting the institution itself. As those constitutional realities became clearer, the story surrounding Edward's inheritance began to look remarkably different. Instead of presenting a contest over power, it revealed the importance of legal continuity, historical precedent, and carefully defined responsibilities that extend beyond individual reigns. The lawyer's interpretations did not remove every question, but they shifted the conversation onto firmer ground. What first appeared to be a debate about one member of the royal family gradually evolved into a deeper examination of how the monarchy balances tradition with law, reminding observers that its greatest strength may lie not in unlimited authority, but in the enduring rules that quietly shape every transition from one generation to the next. Why are senior royals quietly shifting their stance around Edward's rising influence? What do Anne's unwavering loyalty and Sophie's growing presence signal behind closed doors? And could the public reaction be hinting at a far larger change inside the monarchy that no one expected yet? Royal divide draws growing attention. As the constitutional questions surrounding Prince Edward's inheritance became more widely understood, the conversation spread far beyond legal experts. Royal commentators, historians, journalists, and members of the public all began examining what Edward's strengthened position might mean for the future of the monarchy. What had first appeared to be a straightforward succession story gradually evolved into a broader discussion about continuity, tradition, and the careful balance between preserving the past and guiding the institution into a new era. The growing attention reflected more than curiosity. It revealed how closely people were watching every decision made during the early years of King Charles III's reign. Among those drawing renewed attention was Anne, Princess Royal, whose reputation for respecting tradition has been established over decades of public service. Anne has consistently emphasized duty over publicity, earning widespread respect for her dedication to royal responsibilities. Although she has rarely commented publicly on private family matters, historians often note that her approach reflects the values instilled by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Because of that reputation, many observers viewed her continued commitment to constitutional continuity as symbolically important, even without public statements directly addressing Edward's situation. At the same time, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, attracted increasing recognition for her expanding public role. Over many years, she quietly built a reputation for dependable service, representing the royal family across the United Kingdom and overseas. Following the deaths of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth II, both Edward and Sophie assumed additional responsibilities, reinforcing their importance within the working monarchy. Their measured approach contrasted with the intense public attention surrounding other members of the family, leading many commentators to describe them as steady and reliable figures during a period of significant transition. Media coverage reflected those changing perceptions. Some reports focused on Edward's constitutional position, while others emphasized the historical significance of Prince Philip's long-standing wish that his youngest son should inherit the Duke of Edinburgh title. Commentators differed in their interpretations, yet many agreed that the discussion extended beyond one title or one individual. Instead, it raised broader questions about how royal traditions are preserved as new generations assume leadership within the institution. Royal historians offered additional perspective by placing recent developments within a much longer timeline. They observed that successful transitions have often depended upon respecting carefully established precedent while adapting gradually to changing public expectations. In that context, Edward's appointment appeared less like an isolated event and more like another chapter in the monarchy's continuing evolution. Rather than signaling dramatic change, it reflected continuity built through decades of preparation and shared understanding between successive generations. Public opinion remained varied, as expected with any issue involving the royal family. Some believed Edward's inheritance demonstrated the enduring strength of promises made by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Others regarded it simply as the natural fulfillment of long-standing plans. Whatever interpretation prevailed, interest continued to grow because the story touched fundamental questions about trust, responsibility, and institutional stability. As those conversations expanded, one reality became increasingly apparent. Edward's strengthened position was no longer viewed only through the lens of personal inheritance. It had become part of a much wider discussion about the monarchy's future, the preservation of its traditions, and the lasting influence of decisions made across generations. Legacy does not simply fade inside the monarchy, it hardens into precedent, shaping every decision that follows. But what happens when new leadership quietly questions those inherited rules? Who decides what remains untouchable? And what consequences emerge when history itself refuses to bend? Keep watching. History leaves lasting royal boundaries. As the discussion surrounding Prince Edward's inheritance continued to unfold, a deeper question emerged that reached far beyond one royal title or one generation. Why do some decisions made by a monarch become so firmly woven into the fabric of the institution that later sovereigns rarely attempt to change them? Historians have long argued that the strength of the British monarchy lies not only in its ability to adapt, but also in its commitment to continuity. That principle became increasingly relevant as attention turned from Edward himself to the lasting influence of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, whose decisions continue to shape the monarchy even after their deaths. Throughout her 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth II earned a reputation for valuing stability above sudden change. Her approach was often cautious, measured, and guided by precedent rather than personal preference. Decisions made under her reign were rarely viewed as temporary solutions. Instead, they became part of a much broader institutional framework designed to preserve confidence in the crown across generations. That legacy continues to influence how many constitutional experts interpret modern royal developments, especially those involving succession, titles, and long-term responsibilities. Prince Philip's influence followed a similar path. Although he never reigned as monarch, he spent decades helping define the modern identity of the royal family through public service, charitable work, and unwavering dedication to duty. His vision extended beyond his own lifetime, particularly regarding the future of the Duke of Edinburgh title. His publicly expressed wish that Edward should eventually inherit the title reflected more than personal affection. It demonstrated his desire to preserve a legacy he believed required careful stewardship rather than simple ceremonial succession. That intention gained additional significance because Queen Elizabeth II was widely understood to share the same objective. Constitutional continuity became the thread connecting those decisions. The monarchy depends upon public confidence that important commitments made by one sovereign will not be casually discarded by the next. Without that consistency, historians argue, the institution would struggle to maintain the stability that has allowed it to endure through centuries of political and social change. Edward's appointment as Duke of Edinburgh therefore came to symbolize something much larger than a family transition. It represented the continuation of plans carefully developed across two reigns, and ultimately respected under a third. Some observers questioned whether the public had underestimated the importance of precedent when discussing royal authority. Others believed recent debates revealed how easily constitutional tradition can be misunderstood in an age dominated by headlines and rapid opinion. While interpretations varied, few disputed that the decisions of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip continued to carry remarkable influence. Their legacy remained visible not because it was repeatedly defended, but because it had already become deeply embedded within the institution itself. As the story moved forward, Edward's place within that legacy appeared increasingly clear. His inheritance reflected more than historical recognition or constitutional procedure. It illustrated how carefully established decisions can shape the future long after those who made them are gone. That realization transformed the discussion into something far broader than a royal family story, suggesting that history itself may remain one of the monarchy's most powerful and enduring guardians, quietly guiding each new reign with lessons written long before today's debates ever began. What if Edward's greatest inheritance was never visible to the public? Was it the quiet trust of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, or something deeper the monarchy has never fully explained? And what does Charles truly hold compared to Edward's unseen advantage? Promises outlast every royal reign. As the story reached its final stage, the focus shifted away from legal interpretations and constitutional debate toward something far more enduring: Prince Edward's journey revealed that the most valuable inheritance within the royal family cannot always be measured through titles, residences, or official ceremonies. Instead, it is often defined by trust earned over decades of quiet service. That realization gave new meaning to everything that had come before, transforming what first appeared to be a discussion about royal authority into a deeper reflection on legacy, continuity, and the lasting influence of promises made across generations. For many years, Edward remained one of the least publicized members of the royal family. While other royals frequently occupied newspaper headlines, he steadily carried out engagements, supported charitable organizations, and represented the crown without seeking widespread attention. Alongside Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, he gradually accepted increasing responsibilities, particularly after the deaths of Prince Philip in 2021 and Queen Elizabeth II in 2022. That consistent record of service helped shape public perception, leading many observers to view his appointment as Duke of Edinburgh in 2023 as the natural continuation of a role for which he had quietly prepared throughout much of his adult life. The significance of that appointment extended beyond formal recognition. By granting Edward the Duke of Edinburgh title, King Charles III fulfilled the long-standing wishes publicly associated with both Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. In doing so, the new reign reinforced an important principle of constitutional continuity. Rather than replacing carefully established intentions, it demonstrated how one generation of leadership can preserve decisions made by the previous one. Historians often describe that continuity as one of the monarchy's greatest strengths, allowing the institution to evolve while remaining anchored in its own traditions. That perspective also offered an interesting contrast between the inheritances received by the two brothers. Charles inherited the crown itself, together with the immense constitutional responsibilities of the sovereign. Edward inherited the responsibility of continuing Prince Philip's legacy through the Duke of Edinburgh title and the charitable mission closely associated with it. Although their roles differed dramatically, both reflected lives shaped more by duty than personal choice. The comparison encouraged many observers to think less about competition and more about the different forms that royal service can take. How history ultimately judges this period will depend on more than headlines or public debate. Future historians are likely to examine how established precedent, constitutional practice, and personal dedication combine to shape one of the most significant transitions within the modern monarchy. They may conclude that the lasting importance of Edward's inheritance lay not in the title alone, but in the confidence placed in him by those who came before. In the end, the greatest legacy was never something that could simply be granted or withdrawn. It was built patiently through years of service, strengthened by continuity, and preserved through trust. That enduring foundation suggests the true story reaches far beyond one royal appointment, reminding future generations that while reigns inevitably change, carefully kept promises often possess a remarkable ability to outlast them all, shaping the monarchy long after ceremonies have ended and history quietly continues its course. So, what do you think? Did Edward rightfully inherit a legacy long promised, or could history have unfolded differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating royal stories.